Some of our most impressive and abiding lessons we learn from experience. I was specially prepared to learn at that time, for the innovation of the Sabbath school had but recently come down from the prelatic through the Presbyterian to the Reformed Presbyterian Church. Here is a young man who is to, quote, establish Sunday schools, unquote, commissioned by neither ecclesiastical nor civil authority, nor responsible to either, but to a Sunday school union self-originated. A true specimen of his biblical knowledge and competence as a teacher of youth in the knowledge of Christianity has been given above. Amid a fluency of pious cant, he is avowedly actuated by the desire of a, quote, winning souls for Christ, unquote. No, but by the sordid desire of gain at the rate of $1,200 per annum. The treasury of this, quote, voluntary association, unquote, was well supplied. It appears at that date, and it still continues to be fully replenished. But to return from this digression, my salary has varied all along from a promise of $600 to $70 maximum and minimum per annum. Detailed statistics are dry reading, but I must give the reader a few samples of the manner in which the salary was paid. It has been already stated that my settlement in the Brush Creek congregation was at the rate of $400 a year, and that the amount of their subscription was $160 yearly. No definite times of payment were specified. These were made at any time by the members, either in cash to their treasurer or to myself in divers kinds of farm produce, corn, flour, pork, etc. My book account will vouch for the following results as a specimen. At the end of the first year, June 6, 1832, the arrears were $60.25. Second year, deficit $63.67. Third year, $93.11, etc., having a few years increased threefold in numbers and decreased in godly practice. The congregation raised my salary to $300, and at the next semi-annual meeting lowered it again. That was the time when the abolition excitement prevailed, when I declined to descend from the pulpit and occupy a public platform with infidels, drunkards, Sabbath breakers, to testify against slavery, and when my people were counseled from headquarters to erase their names from their subscription paper and starve me out. The question may now naturally arise, how did I manage to obtain means of living? 2 ways. I supplied vacancies at different and distant places, and the most usual compensation for many years was $5 a Sabbath. The other way of procuring a livelihood was by cultivating a few, that is 9, acres of ground which I owned. Those acres produced wheat, corn, rye, barley, hay, potatoes, besides an orchard of diverse fruits and garden of vegetables. When at home, with any hired help needed, I attended to the cultivation of all these products of the earth, that I might not be burdensome to my charge. And I am not ashamed to quote, and in similar circumstances to apply, the noble words of the great Apostle Paul, descriptive of his own practice, and as an example to other ministers, quote, I have coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. Yea, ye yourselves know that these hands have ministered unto my necessities, and to them that were with me. I have showed you all things, how that so laboring ye ought to support the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive, unquote. This part of Paul's example, which he enjoined upon the elders, ministers, of Ephesus, I considered it my duty to follow, when providentially placed amid similar surroundings. I must not omit here ingratitude to the donors and thankfulness to God that I have been partly sustained by widows' mites, long since gone, I believe, to glory, some of whom were never in the fellowship of the Reformed Presbytery. Besides, I have many times been surprised, not in the modern nauseating fashion, by donations from persons in quarters altogether unexpected. I have never been left destitute of the necessaries and many of the comforts of this life. I studied to owe no man anything, but to love even those whom, quote, I am demanded of conscience, unquote, to oppose and withstand to the face. The rest of my time was at the disposal of Presbytery. I supplied 2 stations, each 45 miles distance. and in opposite directions, one of them in Kentucky. My trials in the ministry very soon began. As a preacher, I was acceptable to our associate Reformed neighbors, and knowing how meager a salary was promised me, soon the temptation reached my ears that if I would only join their church and be their pastor, my salary would be $800 per annum. One of them said many years after, quote, "Mr. Steele was not for sale," unquote, and he is yet living to vouch for this. The meager salary was never fully paid, although much of it came in farm produce, flour, corn, pork, etc. The arrears annually increased, so that I find on my account book at settlement, February 7th, 1834, the balance due was $60.25. I note this merely as a sample. Farther on this may be corroborated. But pecuniary matters were not my greatest trials. Most of the members of session, I believe, were honest men, but not intelligent or faithful. Of one I must in duty speak plainly, but briefly. When a candidate for the eldership, an elder of the Associate Reformed Church, and brother-in-law to the candidate, kindly cautioned our minister against ordaining him as being unfit for that office, yet he was ordained. A neighbor and this elder quarreled about their accounts. They had a war of words. The neighbor, avoiding an action of slander, is reported as having thus replied to his adversary, quote, "Sir, I am no hypocrite, although I do not pretend to belong to any church. Yet I never killed my neighbor's steer in the woods, hid the skin, and sold the meat. I never cut down a bee tree on Sunday, nor do I always wait to be sued before paying my debts," unquote, etc. I believe these stinging words from a man of the world were not without some grounds. Our congregation in 5 years had increased to the number of 150. I believe that when outwardly most prosperous, we were spiritually in our worst condition. I began to see that I must put a stop to the loose action of the session in admitting applicants. An opportunity occurred. After repeated solicitation by an elder who lived some 8 miles on one side to call a meeting of session there, I at length reluctantly complied. All the members were not present, but there was a majority. Session being constituted, a woman, who was a stranger to all but the one elder, appeared before us. She had been raised a Presbyterian in Ireland, been married to a Papist in America, and raised a family. I asked her some of the first questions in the shorter catechism. Her answers were all apologetic. Quote, "She knew the catechism in her youth, but had forgotten it," unquote, etc. I then asked some simple questions in other words. Still nothing but apologies. I then said to the session, quote, "I presume it is not necessary to proceed with the examination," unquote. Quote, "Oh, I think not, moderator," unquote, came from one, and all seemed to assent. Quote, "Well, what farther order do you take?" unquote. Instantly it was moved and seconded that the woman be received. The motion was put and carried unanimously. What course could now be legally taken? I said, quote, "Brethren, I am sorry that I feel constrained to protest against this action. I must appeal to Presbytery," unquote. They were all silent, not knowing what to do. They dreaded to meet me at Presbytery. I pitied them in a dilemma from which they knew no way of escape. To open a way for their relief, I said, quote, "It is true that a moderator has no negative over the court, but a majority have a right to move a reconsideration of their own action," unquote. Immediately, a motion for reconsideration was carried, and instantly a reversal of their first action passed unanimously. Then the woman opened her mouth in Billingsgate and profanity till she passed out of the door. Quote, "Now, brethren," said I, "you must all be convinced that this woman was not fit to be received," unquote. They all assented. The anti-slavery agitation had now pervaded all communities in the northern states. In 1836, abolition societies were forming in all directions. I attended at the first organizing of one in our vicinity. A salaried agent presided. I offered a series of resolutions as a preliminary test. The chairman stated that the proposed organization, quote, "had nothing to do with the Bible or religion," unquote. That was enough for me. I went home. But some of my members joined the society and voted for its periodical meetings on the day of our usual fellowship meetings. No one who has a drop of the martyr's blood in his veins could be apathetic to at such a time. especially when Congress had passed the fugitive slave law requiring every man to assist the slaveholder or his pensioned agent when called upon to arrest the panting fugitive under a penalty of $1,000 fine and imprisonment. Many yet living will attest that I had always borne public testimony against slavery, even to such extent that some who sympathized with that inhuman system took their hats and left the audience. And here a footnote. Some of these afterwards earnestly desired and obtained my counsel and prayers on their deathbeds. Psalm 141, verse 6. Most of our ministers had joined the local abolition societies, and some of them had accepted an appointment from the American Anti-Slavery Society at a salary of $40 a month. It was soon noised abroad that I refused to join or to occupy a public platform in common with drunkards, Sabbath breakers, infidels, etc., to oppose slavery. It also became known that I declined to be identified with similar characters, slaveholders included, to oppose drunkenness. In short, that I utterly refused to cooperate for moral reform with any association outside of God's ordinances, in violation of our covenanted unity and uniformity. One day, a, quote, two-faced, unquote, member of my charge, to ingratiate himself with me, said, quote, I will show you a letter in confidence received lately from Pittsburgh, if you will not tell, unquote. I replied, quote, I cannot pledge myself to conceal any matter of public interest to the church, unquote. He seemed chagrined. He is yet alive and knows whereof I write, and I never saw the letter. On the rapid increase of my charge, as already noticed, my salary was raised from $160 to $300, but was never paid, for I soon heard that by council the subscriptions had been erased to, quote, starve me out, unquote. This measure failing, as I was neither, quote, for sale, unquote, nor likely to be, quote, starved out, unquote, resort was had to another expedient.